I've got an idea for a video today.
Really? Not gonna ask us or go over your stuff or talk about some bullshit?
Honestly, I do need to spend a little bit of time, though I know this subject might take some time if I go into the entirety of the subject, but we all know I ain't gonna do that.
So, you need us to burn a little time before we jump into this subject of, let me check your notes, is that a horse with toes?
Yes, it is, and everyone now knows the subject of this video.
Talking about the death core of Kriegs or the planet itself?
Actually, a bit of both. Mostly the world's history and the subfaction's history should only take me about 10 to 15 minutes. And you'll know I prefer to be under the 15-minute mark. I could probably start right here, but let's add a few more lines just to stretch it a bit.
You know, I've actually been to Kriegs before I joined the Watch. We have some things we did that were atrocious. I cannot forgive myself for what we did to those women.
Oh yeah. Wait. Are there women on Kriegs?
I assume so. They got a weird story from what Malleus tells me.
Hold on. Malleus? That's your name?
My Black Shield name. I'm not telling you my given name. I don't know if I ever will, actually.
Yeah, fair enough. It's your ultimate choice and not something I'll push, but let's talk about the world. Kriegs is a death world. Once it was a hive world, and it kind of still has hive cities, but that's a subject we'll get into in a minute. The world of Kriegs is in the Segmentum Tempestus, which, where that is kind of confusing. I think it's galactic south of Terra, but maps of the Milky Way galaxy in the 41st millennium are rather confusing, since Terra is not where Earth should be, and from a galactic standpoint, that's the same day, in the grand scale of things, to where I come from. So, location is confusing. It's in an unknown system with an unknown government and an unknown gravity. The only information about the Death World as it stands now is its sector and its segmentum, the Eulus sector and the Segmentum Tempestus. Even the tithe grade isn't known, which is weird given you'd think the Kriegs would have some of the greatest tithe payments. For those that don't know, a tithe is essentially a tax of soldiers. A world or county or whatever equivalents will give a portion of their soldiers of a certain qualification to the kingdom in charge. This is done by the Imperium of Man, the Tau Empire, and more indirectly, the Chaos Warbands and the Necron dynasties. But I mentioned that Kriegs was formerly a hive world. The world once had a metropolitan hive cities that covered and dotted the surface of the world. The history of the world at this time is absolutely abysmally kept. There's so very little information on the world, and most of it may just be myths. Apparently, during this time period, the whole planet was ruled by a council called the Council of Autocrats. That name makes no sense. An autocracy is a system of government where one person has absolute power over all factors of everything. You can't have a council and an autocracy. But from what we can guess, a lot of the myths say these autocratic councilmen were greedy, power-hungry, and corrupt. They'd use the manufacturing capability of the world to buy other worlds, but the one faction they couldn't seem to buy, they tried their best to rebel against. The Adeptus Munitorum, a subfaction of the Adeptus Administratum. Now, this is probably the most specific date I have ever seen in the 40k books, but in the 433rd year of the 40th millennium, the High Autocrat of Kriegs' largest hive city, who was also the chairman of the Council of Autocrats, which are only technically autocrats, renounced the Emperor of Mankind as his master and overlord. Now, this led to an immediate upheaval of everything. Footmen on the world got violent, and there was fighting everywhere. Some for the Emperor, some against. Mostly for, and the autocrats heavily misjudged the loyalty of their thralls. Those that fought for the autocrats ended up falling to chaos, becoming mutated and disgusting. The councilmen, realizing that they only had monsters on their side, realized there wasn't a whole lot of options. They bombed it all. On a holy holiday known as the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension, the Colonel Jurton of Furograd used a mechanicum weapon to annihilate all life on the surface of the world, carpet bombing with atomic bombs. Not nuclear weapons, atomic. A nuclear weapon irradiates an area by causing nuclear particles to bounce too much on themselves. An atomic bomb just splits an atom and tells everything to go fuck itself. This atomic carpet bomb caused another atomic weapons series to go off. It boiled the seas, blackened out the sky, the entire world was dead within days. But life, finds a way. Illegal tech kept the Kriegs alive, but those that survived in the underground facilities kept fighting against the Council loyalists. Age was no longer a concern for either side of this civil war. If you could stand, you could fight, and you did. But the radioactive fields that covered the surface and deep into the bunkers they were forced into led to a lot of reproductive issues. Illegal tech, as I said, kept the Kriegs alive. They turned to cloning technology, hypercloning. A body may look 15, but it might only be 3 weeks old. And in either situation, you'd never know because they were programmed with an idea in their minds and out the tube. I am nobody important. I must live and die for the Emperor. 500 years. This civil war, this guerrilla war, went on before the Death Corps of Krieg emerged victorious. They rocked up to the Imperial man and said, "Sorry we're late, bruv. We had a bit of a scrap with some gnarly chaps, but we've come around to chew an ass and kick bubblegum, and we're, unfortunately, all out of arse." So the Imperium looked at their gas mask covered allies and said, "Yeah, sure, we'll provide the ass. And 1 stick of bubblegum per week, so long as you keep fighting for the Emperor." And they cheered on that. But keep in mind that programming. You live and die for the Emperor. There's a meme that the Death Corps of Krieg are suicidal psychopaths, when that's just not true. They've got a history of killing their commanders for making suicidal decisions with no gain. They'll happily give up their own lives in order to further their cause, but they will not choose death if it doesn't gain ground. The Kriegs were bred for war. They live for war, and they die for war. War is all they know, and by their own admittance, if they ever live to see peace, they'll leave to find conflict. Honestly, I think this is probably the best course of action for a character in such a setting. Like, let's look at the motto of this game. In the grimdark future, the 41st millennium, there is only war. Yeah, I think the Krieg will be good for some time, even if Gilliman isn't happy about that option. Hell, he trains the Space Marines to be public servants and leaders, just in case they ever are allowed to stop fighting. But for the foreseeable future of this franchise, there will be something for the Kriegs to throw hands with, so shove off.